Okay, we should be live now, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Good evening, everyone. We appear to have a few members missing. They'll probably join as we go on, but it has gone 6 o'clock. So welcome to the August meeting of the West Northamptonshire Shadow Authority. Any apologies for absence?
I haven't received any apologies, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2, notifications to request to address the meeting.
None received, Chair.
Any member declarations of interest? Any? So move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of July. They have been circulated. Is there anything on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, which finishes meeting close 7:14? So are we agreed that these are a true record of the meeting?
Yes.
Agreed?
Yes, agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you. I'm not quite sure how we go about signing them, but we'll consider minutes to be approved. Announcements. I just got one earlier on, well, literally at 4 o'clock. I went to have a brief look around the new hospital medical centre that's being built in Brackley. It's about 85% complete, and you can begin to see where consulting rooms are going to be and where the various areas are going to be. So as we move into West Northampton, it's going to be a cracking facility for the southern part of the area, and a real credit to a number of people from the old Brackley Cottage Hospital and the GPs and everyone who's worked tremendously hard over many years to make that happen. But it really is coming along, and they're a little behind because of COVID, which is perfectly understandable, but still targeting the end of the year. So that was really good, and hopefully all of us can get there to at some point when it does open. So I don't believe they're scheduling any more informal visits like what I had earlier. So we move on to the Programme Director's update. Paul, your slides have been circulated.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll explain the report through the slides that Paul's going to share on the screen. If you could go to page 13, I think, Paul, and start on the coloured one there, the one with the green colours on, yeah. So thank you. Just a couple of key points to note there. There's been an improvement in the status of the ICT programme that we were forecasting last period has now moved to green, and there's a lot of hard work gone in there with Richard Ellis and the programme team and the additional resources that we've put in there to get everything on track in a very critical and key area of the programme. So we're reporting status as green there. We were last period reporting adults as green, but it has moved to amber in this period. And the main reason for that is that, as you know, adults are moving to a soft implementation in October. So they're kind of beta testing all our processes around HR and what that means in terms of staff, workforce and locations and all those things, and what the TUPE arrangements would look like. So there's been some things to work through with colleagues in HR there, which has meant a little bit of slippage, not unmanageable, but it has moved the status to amber, but we expect it in the column to the right to revert back to green as we've resolved most of those issues through Anna and her team. The two ambers on there are really consistent ambers for a number of months now. Children's, I don't envisage moving from amber at any point soon. We've got the Children's Trust due to go live on the 1st of November. There is absolutely no room for slippage in there, and one of the reasons why I couldn't be forecasting we'd ever be in a comfortable position to say that is green. There is considerable work to do around education services and the costs of splitting those and the work required to disaggregate them. Significant activity there to do. And whilst we expect that everything that the council is supposed to have done for the trust to make sure that the trust can be up and running, the council has done and working very hard to make sure that we're meeting all the deadlines. But it's a partnership with the trust, and we have to make sure that they can get their side over the line as well. And that's the kind of challenge for us there around Children's Trust. So noting the direction of travel where we'd expect these to be, still 2 ambers. And the corporate one really is mainly about ensuring we have the resources released from the sovereign councils through the implementation phase. So things like HR and ICT and the expertise that's needed, that's within the people, and I don't mean programme people, the people that work in those areas, the specialists in those areas, that we will need to release to focus on the implementation phase of the programme. So until that is in place and bottomed out, that will remain amber and under careful watch as to where we are, what we need, and how those resources are being facilitated to be available. Notwithstanding, we've got the COVID impact and business as usual to deal with as well, which we fully understand as a programme. Just in terms of the next slide and programme notes, most of that is covered in what I'm just going to talk about, but very briefly, we had a positive session with the trade unions and engaged them with the draft blueprint. And we shared that with them on the Thursday after the last joint implementation executive, and they were grateful that they'd had early sight of it. And Anna and I took them through it and explained it to them and explained it was draft and what all the next steps were. So I think that was positively received by the trade unions. What you will have in your packs, moving on to the next slide, Paul, is a report on the programme Health Check, which in your packs, I think it's from page 29. And I won't go through it in huge detail, but just to summarise a few key points there for members of the executive. So this was an independent assessment of the programme and undertaken by a really experienced team with previous unitary setup experience. And it was on behalf of the LGA and led by Andrew Flockhart, who was appointed way back last year as a critical friend to the programme. The report covers 7 key areas of the programme, and there's about 30 recommendations that's come out of the report, and these are being developed into an action plan with clearly assigned owners that we'll bring to the JIE next month. A number of key people in terms of methodology were interviewed by the team from the programme, from chief execs as well to the interim chief execs. There's a full list in the report of who was interviewed. We also provided lots of documentation which was reviewed and then triangulated through follow-up conversations. The one part that they are going to follow up on is the affordability and the finances side of the blueprint and the work that's required from the medium-term financial planning, which is the work that's now working through in the member task and finish group. So they were unable to make a full assessment of the affordability of the blueprints, which we'd asked them to give us some independent view on, but the timing just isn't right. So they are going to come back and do that when we've got some of the outputs locked down from that task and finish group and how that feeds into the budget setting process. So that'll happen September, early October, and we'll get a follow-up independent view on that as well. So I think the key messages that came out of the report that hopefully you've had a chance to read: programme fundamentals are strong, adequate funding and resources prioritised in the right areas. The approach to change management is well developed, and the network of change champions is a clear asset. The ICT programme is very large, complex and further complicated by the requirements of the Children's Trust. We do have a huge challenge there in the ICT programme, and quite a lot of the recommendations in Andrew's report centre on the ICT programme, not in a negative way. All the recommendations are intended to strengthen the approach going into the implementation phase. Important in the coming months is to identify the tier 3 and 4 middle management level, and making sure that that they are allocated and they understand their responsibility. So the HR processes in determining who will lead on key services way out from vesting day is really critical, and this came out in the report, as it's those people who lead the design and implementation of those services supported by the programme, and the people that will have skin in the game beyond vesting day is critical to making sure that the necessary resources, oversight and expertise is in the right areas in all those service areas. That particularly strongly came out in the report. Key issue ahead is the diversions of the parts of the programme that focused on distinct areas of West and North implementations. And the recommendation is really to ensure there's careful realignment of management and the programme and the interdependencies within the critical path in how we diverge the programme as we get nearer to vesting day. And the last part, I suppose, was a verbal message that Andrew gave at the JIE, and he made it really clear that this was probably the biggest thing that was happening at this point in time in local government, hugely challenging in the current context as well, but also a once in a generation opportunity that we need to make sure we absolutely seize. So that's just an overview of the report. I'm happy through the chair to take questions on that at the end of my update. And one of Andrew's recommendations, if you could just move on to that slide, Paul, thank you, is how we ensure there's more detailed reporting going forward once we get into the blueprint sign-off, which we have been planning for anyway. And this schematic shows how we'll be reporting once the blueprints have been approved, and we're absolutely clear about what's happening where, in which services, and what the actual delivery looks like. We'll start reporting on a north and west basis. So that will go through those service-specific things and those programme-wide things that will be required on both west and north. So what you see here is the day one assurance framework, which is the overall critical path and how all those things come together. And then the updates in terms of the individual programmes and the individual must-have requirements for safe and legal on day one, plus any plus that's agreed through that. And when those three things come together, we'll have the West functions and we'll have those central functions that will come together in one report every month. And that will go through the Programme Implementation Board, Joint Implementation Executive, all with the view of how we resolve any issues quickly and promptly, and issues where the programme can't resolve them and where we need Programme Implementation Board or Joint Implementation Executive to either be aware or to provide specific support. And then those reports will come to the West Shadow Executive on a monthly basis in a much more detailed view on a specific where are we with the West implementation, so it won't take any cognizance of North other than those interdependencies that will sit between the two programmes. Just moving on to the change management, and I'll go through this quite quickly. So the actions through July really focused on engagement with change champions and bringing them back into the fold after the COVID and all the kind of deployment of those change champions in other areas. We also undertook a gap analysis, and we've got a clear sight now of which services in which councils don't have change champions and where we need to specifically recruit. We've also been plotting the rollout of 365 and the requirements of supporting ICT colleagues in that rollout. Specifically, also we've started the voice and email automation pilot, and there's been 68 change champions involved in that work there. The next slide is the current summary. It is moving all the time. It has increased since this report was prepared. But on the right-hand side, you'll see the numbers of change champions by service area, and on the left-hand side, the bar chart by each of the sovereign councils. And we do have some swings and roundabouts. We do lose some through natural attrition, people leaving, people changing jobs. Those numbers are quite small, but there is a net increase from the last period of 13. But there's a significant increase in numbers to report in the next period, I'm sure. The actions really through August that we'll be focusing on is the development of a change charter, which is in place, which is there to support change champions in how they work and support their colleagues in the services to do that. So that charter sets out how we can support them to help support their colleagues. We'll be focusing really heavily on recruitment of change champions into those areas that we've identified in the gap analysis. And working specifically with chief exec, senior leadership teams across the council to support that process. Just on the communication and engagement slide, there's a few bullet points which I won't go through in any detail. You can all see what those are. But what we have been focusing on is strengthening the communication and engagement resource and capacity for the implementation phase. So we brought in external support through FutureGov, and we've increased the capacity of our in-house team through secondments, very kindly through colleagues in the Borough Council, in South Northants and in Kettering, who've released dedicated comms specialists to come and support the programme, specifically on this area. And we're establishing how we're approaching the implementation phase. And those colleagues are heavily involved in the communication and engagement as we go now into the blueprints and what those plans are and how they roll out. I think from me, happy, Chair, to take any questions, and then we've got Audra's report as part of this on the finance update.
So any questions to Paul? Not so much a question from me, but more of an observation. Now, Andrew Flockhart's work that he did in the review, much as he time to time says that members and officers have all got a common view and are working together, it's rather interesting when you look down through his appendix 1 of the people he spoke to. I don't think he actually spoke to a single member. So all he's getting is an officer's view that members actually think everything is okay, and not a member's view that members think everything is okay. And I'm sure we do, but maybe it would have been a more complete report had he done that. There's a couple of other bits and pieces which I'm entirely sure as to which is chicken and which is egg, but I think overall, I think he was saying, yeah, we're taking on a lot, we know that, and he doesn't identify any massive holes. There was nothing reading that where any of us would have said, oh dear, we've all overlooked that. So it's always reassuring to know that, but we didn't have that sort of heart in the mouth. How did we miss that? So I'm happy with that, and I think as well is it possible that we can try and make clear some of the changes that we're making. So for instance, he did talk about wanting more detail on what we've just been through in terms of the risks and the red, amber, green stuff. So is it possible we can positively draw that out to say, yeah, we've taken on board what you've had to say, and this is what we're doing in response. When they return in September, October, they can see that we've made some changes in response to their ideas.
Yeah, Chair, if I may as well, if it'd be helpful, I can talk to Andrew about speaking to some of the elected members as well when he comes back to do the finance position, if you think that would be helpful. Recognise it is a gap.
Oh, that's just an observation from my point of view. But
Could I add to that? That was probably my fault, because when he spoke to me, I told him how wonderfully engaged all members were and how and committed they all were. And he may have taken that as members were all fully engaged in the programme. So that might have been my fault.
Oh, I don't think it's anyone's fault. It's just an observation. So we'll move on to the finances. And Audra's got no bad news either. Audra.
Evening, members. The format of this report will no doubt be familiar to you now. And since it was last reported to you, unfortunately, the situation has got slightly worse in that we're projecting a variance of £239,000. The reasons for that are given in the report. And I just wanted to say, with regard to the 239,000, it's not so much that that won't be delivered at all. It's just that won't be delivered this year. We are still looking at those savings being delivered in future years. As was promised last time as well, you'll see a new section in the report on the outturn position of all Northamptonshire authorities. On the table there, you'll see that the overall adverse variance is currently projected at some £8.5 million. But after mitigations, this is brought down to 1.4 million. There are lots of common themes, as you would have expected, throughout the district and boroughs that's causing those adverse variances. And we've heard just this week that the final guidance for the income grant that we should get will be published on Monday. So we await that eagerly, as we're hoping that that will further close that variance going forward. With regard to future reports, obviously each of the district and boroughs and the county report on different timescales, so not everyone does it every month. So the next update from all of the 8 sovereign authorities will actually be presented in November. So very short and sweet report, Chair, but I'm happy to take questions.
Any questions for Audra? The only one I had was the 1.4 million that was hanging out of Northampton Borough. All the other districts are using reserves, and that position might change then once we get the 75% of the 95%. How that's going to get calculated. But is it a case that there isn't 1.4 of reserves left in Northampton, or are they just thinking there's another way to plug the gap? I wasn't sure what we were trying to say there.
Chair, if I may, I believe George is on.
A question, yeah, it's probably a question to take offline to Northampton rather than trying to do it here, because it's a sovereign authority issue. It's not a shadow authority issue.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at George and Jonathan. I'm going to assume that they're comfortable with that and it'll magic itself away over time.
Yes, Chair, happy to update you offline, but yes, we hope have plans to mitigate that through other means. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I thought that might be the case. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think the fact, yeah, that we are a wee bit out at this stage, given what we've been through with COVID, is actually remarkable. That we're only, well, 239 grand off on a almost £14.5 million target, given what we've been through the last 6 months. So I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much about that. So okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you, Audra, as always, for keeping us straight and narrow.
Thank you.
So we move on to, is that everything on the Programme Director's update then, Paul?
Yes, Paul Hillsley has briefly left the meeting, Chair, but
okay, that's fine.
He's
We can move.
here. I'm here. I've just moved office.
He's here.
For the future item on the agenda.
He's going to wave
Fair enough. So we move on to pension scheme administering authority. The report has been circulated in Martin's name. It seemed to me to be a statement of the obvious, but Martin, have you anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to add to the report. The report's about who the administering body should be for the pensions administration going forward. There's 4 options set out in paragraph 3.2.2 of the report. One is to do nothing, which we can't do because the county council won't exist. The second one is to have 2 different pension administrating authorities, one for the north and one for the west. And that would be inefficient, and there would be duplication added as a result of that. And so then you got options 3 and options 4. Option 3 is to have it based in West Northamptonshire. Option 4, North Northamptonshire. And the option appraisal then goes through the benefits of based in West Northamptonshire. So that's the recommendation from the report, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions to this? It seemed to be saying it's working, leave it alone. So if members have nothing to say on that, I will formally propose then the recommendation is recommend Shadow Executive select West Northants as the recommended Pensions Administration Authority, option 3, as detailed in the options appraisal. Are we all agreed? Sorry, can I have a seconder in Jonathan?
Happy to second, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah. So are we all agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. That was carried. Thank you. So I move on to the task and finish group reports. So council harmonisation, council tax harmonisation. Rebecca, are you going to introduce this, or Martin?
No, I'm quite happy to introduce it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
The task and finish group's first task is to harmonise council tax across the West. The 3 authorities have different council tax levels as outlined in the report. There were 2 options. We could either harmonise council tax based on bringing up the lowest charging authority as quickly as possible, or harmonising through an averaging system, which involves averaging across the entire council base across the West. We have to achieve harmonisation by the beginning of year 8 after vesting day as a statutory requirement. The 2 different systems bring very different outcomes, potentially in terms of income to the authority. Having looked at all the issues and the figures behind the issues, the task and finish group are recommending that we use the averaging method of harmonising council tax. If we were to go ahead at the presumed referendum rate of 3.99%, that will generate an extra 7 million of income for the authority in year 1, against the other method, which is the using the lowest council tax level. In terms of the harmonising period, it doesn't matter to the quantum of council tax raised whether we harmonise in year 1 or year 8. It's just a quirk of the way the figures work, and there is a lot of supporting documentation if anybody's curious and wants to see how that does indeed achieve that. The group has discussed the harmonisation period and is minded to suggest 3 to 4 years, which will balance out the variances across the 3 authorities as well as we possibly can. But that's for the shadow executive to agree on. Martin, do you wish to come in on any more detail on council tax harmonisation?
Not this stage, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We then moved on to local council tax reduction scheme, which is the benefit that's given to our most vulnerable clients across the West. Again, there is great variation in the schemes offered by the three authorities as outlined on page 53 of the report. The schemes as outlined will give very different outcomes in terms of impact on the council's finances. We are minded to recommend a cost neutral scheme, but this depends on workload of the base load of claimants, which at the moment, because of COVID, has been increasing. So again, our recommendation to the executive is cost neutral, but with an absolute decision made as our financial position becomes clearer as we start the major budget setting work. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? Look, the biggest issue for me on the CTRS is around the collection rates. So as long as we're clear what we think cost neutral is, and that there isn't uncollectible amounts, because the amounts sent are unlikely to be collected with people with low incomes and not being quietly written off later. So we're absolutely sure what cost neutral is, so we know what the costs are, but we can discuss those when we need to make a decision.
Yes.
So
we're also
just
mindful of that issue, and the data is being collected, and we're also mindful of the impact that it's going to have on residents, whichever scheme we choose.
And I know we have mentioned with MHCLG officials around this rather strange anomaly that says you can take up to 8 years to do the council tax part, but you've got little or no time at all to do the CTRS part, which does seem a little inequitable, that you can go from 8% to 20-something% almost overnight, but you can take 3 years to plug a sort of a relatively small £40 gap in overall council tax bills. So it's a bit of a quirk in the regulation, so we are taking advice on that. So this one, we're just being asked to note the progress. So cabinet colleagues, are we seeing that? So we move on to Lizzie and disaggregation. Lizzie. You're still on mute, Lizzie.
That would help, wouldn't it?
Thank you.
So we started at the end of June and finished at the beginning of August, so there's quite a lot to cover in a short time frame. Just to remind you in terms of who's on the panel, because in terms of process, it's important that there was buy-in across the board. We had Phil Bignell, who's Deputy Leader at SNC, and then we had 3 people from the borough, 2 at any one time, and one of those was in the opposition, and then Kevin Parker at DDC. So just to remind you, disaggregation is a backward-looking process. It's integral to budget setting and the medium-term financial plan, which is obviously for another task and finish group. So the objectives, first of all, was to disaggregate the NCC budget. As you're all appreciating by now, a lot of this is children's, 127 million, and adults, which is 167 million. On top of that objective, there was also the amalgamation of the district and the borough budgets, and to provide a starting point to develop the budget for the West Unitary. All the agendas and the full details can be found on Huddle, and I'm not about to go into sort of all the details now, but what I have done is just go through some highlights of each area of the principles, just so that you've got some comfort in terms of the information that's provided at the end. So in terms of the disaggregation principles, adults comes under something called an ordinary residence legislation relating to the Care Act. So that's a specific legislation around this area. And for children, it's all to do with the postcode origin. Anna and her team have done intensive work on this postcode analysis for the service users in order to make sure that it was a fair split when it came to this disaggregation. From there, we moved on to revenue expenditure. And again, the biggest income line is adults, as you'd expect. and that is from individual social care contributions and also from the social care grant. And the information in detail can be found in the session 2 of the huddle information. From there, we moved on to public health grant, which is a statutory responsibility and must be maintained by the council. We looked at the capital programmes, which is funded by a number of grants from government, Section 106, discretionary borrowing, etc. And then finally, within this category, we also looked at what's called the dedicated schools grant, which you'll see on the final matrix at the end. And that's based on pupil census data and is split down into 4 key areas, for example, early years, high needs, that kind of thing. So from there, we're able to go on to the balance sheet disaggregation, which is the final figures for NCC's balance sheet information. And that's from the 2018-19 accounts, which are obviously still in audit. And the Ds and Bs are obviously in various levels of completion. And again, all the information regarding this audit challenge is in the huddle files. Current assets, just for knowledge, are to be utilised within 12 months, and non-current assets are those that are utilised over a longer period of time. The reserves, they're used to fund the council's net assets, and the borrowing details are the short term and long term. And then in terms of reserves, we have those that are usable reserves and those that are unusable reserves. And again, in the last, on the appendix for this area, that is actually detailed down in specifics. So the final session was on the disaggregation of the NCC budget, the dedicated schools grant, the public health grant, capital and balance sheets, and then to that we added the SNC, the Daventry and the borough information. The housing budget, obviously, at the borough needs to be dealt with separately because it's set up in an arm's length organisation. So after the meeting, each meeting, I sent you a summary and identified issues that could have been, of course, contention. And one of those was to do with the road length split versus road density, etc. But post-meeting, I then had meetings with the North leader on this group, and we managed to sort of resolve quite a number before they became an issue. I also discussed the content of the NCC budgets with the Cabinet at NCC. So if you go to the second appendix for disaggregation, you'll see there the indicative aggregation for 2021 and also for 21, 22, 23, 24. So you've got your general fund and then you've got your housing revenue account. You've also got there your dedicated schools grant and your public health, which obviously add to the total. Further down, you then go on to specifics for each area of your assets, your long-term assets and your current assets, all the way through to usable reserves and unusable reserves, which gives you your final total. So I think in summary, I would say that this was a very detailed and comprehensive process in a very short period of time. And I have to say the department, Barry, Henry and all the other people involved did a fabulous job in terms of taking us through it at different skill levels and different interest levels in this budget. Okay, any questions?
All right, any questions for Lizzie? No, I think it's all pretty clear. The principles for disaggregation, because you mentioned a couple there, but there was also a few others, like you said, road length, and there was some things like assets aren't going anywhere, so a bridge isn't going to be moved, and if there end up to be two extra bridges in the west over the north, well, that's too bad because we're not going to give them one, or they wouldn't ask for one either. But also, have we looked at some of the other public-private partnership, PFI, those sort of things?
Yep, PFIs are all in here as well, and they're based on obviously where those arrangements lie within the county. The PFIs are actually in the balance sheet, I think. Hold on. No, just
Are they?
I think they are somewhere. I've seen them here somewhere. PF5s. Yeah, there they go. They're under long-term liabilities.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine.
I mean, there's an awful lot of information, to be fair, and had we not been taken
Yeah.
through step by step, I don't think we'd have got through to this stage without a lot of work on the finance departments, because you can imagine there was different skill sets and different knowledge. So it was having to take us through from, if you like, very little knowledge for some of how, you know, particularly on the NCC budgets, there are so many different pots and so many different funds coming from everywhere. It really is quite complicated, but I do feel very assured, having been through this process, and so did everybody else. And I think that was noted in the minutes, that everybody felt that they'd spent the time explaining it detail line by line.
Yeah, no, it seems pretty clear.
Yeah, okay.
All right, well, thank you for that. So again, we are asked to formally note the work of the Task and Finish group. So Cabinet colleagues, so we note the report. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. So we move on to the day one accommodation. Richard, I think that one's yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I apologise, I was a bit tardy by a couple of minutes. I had some IT problems, which was quite frustrating, but I got here eventually. Day one accommodation. This is really quite simple. There's no big bang here. It's more a slow burn. And the basic principle is that staff members will be using the current blend of working remotely, working from home, and working in the office. And senior leaders and directors are all aware of that ultimate objective and principle. And it's important for us to understand, with regard to managing this and test and challenging it, to ensure that members of staff at all times are aware about where they will be on day one. Now, it sounds quite simple. They will be where they will be now, but that does need to be managed. And I certainly think that the tasking group felt that because it's quite a simple strategy, quite a simple objective, we just need to make sure we don't trip up on this. There are some enablers to ensuring that people can carry on working as they are. We talk about the ability for where there is some disaggregation, where people have departments that are split and working from the same location, to ensure that the IT is able to do that. But if you're working in the same office, half of the computers are going to be working towards the West Command and the other half working towards the North Command. So we're going to need to ensure that some reconfiguration, especially One Angel Square, is managed and managed appropriately. But as I know that senior leaders and directors are aware of the strategy. So what we want in the test and challenge is to ensure that as we work towards vesting day, then all staff are comfortable and sure about where they will be going, and that their IT is going to be working towards their area and on day one. The other issue, obviously, is with regard to building access. That, again, isn't our problem, but these things are essential for members of staff to feel that they can get to work, get into work, and feel part of the organisation they are now working for. And these areas have been taken care of by other parts of the programme. So with regard to the staff, one of my last concerns, or the concerns of the task village, is with regard to welfare. You know, there are some concerns and worries about working remotely, working from home, and this is again where managers, supervisors, senior leaders and directors are responsible for the welfare of their staff. They understand what the strategy is and whether we need to bring people into an office-based environment, as long as it is safe, then that needs to be considered. But also, I think what COVID has taught us is that we can be really flexible as long as the public get the services that they require and the services that they pay for. There are many ways of working with regard to achieve that. And this blend of remote working from home and working in the office appears to be working quite effectively. So I'm quite happy that the strategy is very, very clear and simple. My concern is to ensure that officers and especially those responsible for teams are aware that they need to be careful of the detail, ensuring that everybody is happy as to where they will be going on day one to ensure that the services continue to be delivered. So that's the sort of officer side. On the member side, I'm not saying I was sort of browbeaten into this, because it was a task and finish, and it will ultimately be the shadow authority that will agree this. But I feel until we have a vaccine, until we have a way to protect ourselves, and putting ourselves at risk by meeting as members in large auditoriums, or even travelling to that location. You know, you could pick up things on your way to there, and which is unnecessary when we can effectively carry out the democratic business remotely. However, I think it is important we will come to a stage where, as the vaccine is being pushed out and we begin to move out of the current restrictions to a more normal way of living, that it's important that we begin to set up premises whereby we can meet, and maybe a blend of remote and virtual would be possible as we move towards normality. So I'm happy with the task and finish group recommend to the Shadow Authority that officers look into using the current council officers, sorry, the council chambers at Northampton to find a way of making it COVID proof, ensuring that we can run a system in there and to establish exactly how many people we can meet virtually safely. So what it gives us, again, it gives us a blend. I don't think we would everybody would be able to get in there and keep to the regulations. However, you know, I've been doing some work for my church with regard to Sunday meetings, and I think you can come up with some quite innovative systems where some people can attend, and then we can begin to move to a more normal way of business. So those recommendations will be put before the shadow. That work's being done by officers. So what will happen, members, is again a blend, but also a plan to use a chamber for an actual meeting, as well as the tried and tested systems we have at the moment, which are virtual. So that really is probably a sort of big overview of what we're doing. I'm quite content and happy that everyone knows what they're doing. What's important now is we don't consider this too easy or it's a simple objective, because that is where we will make mistakes. So we need to make sure that at all times we are testing and challenging where people will be on day one, and adapting where we need to, or in either reconfiguration or where some departments do have to be relocated, and we deal with those exceptions professionally and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions for Richard on this one? So, a couple of points from me, and it's probably things that we need officer advice on. My understanding of the legislation is that the member meeting side, virtually like this, comes to an end April or May of next year under the emergency COVID legislation.
7th of May, Chair.
Pardon?
7th of May, Chair.
7th of May. So we can have our first, maybe our second meeting, and then we got a problem. Yeah,
well, to be honest with you, all I'm worried about is day one, Chair. So
yeah, I appreciate that is exactly what you're sticking very closely to the remit, Richard, and no criticism. But I am quite sure, though, that LGA and others, and I suspect every council in the land will be saying, please allow us that flexibility to have more of these type of hybrid meetings. I think all of us would say that the massive positive that's come out of the COVID crisis is the ability to meet much more flexibly to cope with people being on holiday in different locations. So I'm sure we will all be pressing to get that, but until that becomes law, we have to just bear in mind that we don't know where we're going to be next year, but after the 7th of May, as it stands, these types of meeting would then fall back to being unlawful again. So,
but Chair, I think we've covered that by asking officers to do that bit of work, which I think is covers all aspects, covers I'm sure the government wouldn't be putting people at risks. However, we will have a system to operate our chamber in a safe way, and that will give us a number on how many we can cater for. And if we need to amend those plans, we will do with regard to numbers, but we will have a plan to meet literally, all right, come post 7th of May, if we need.
And I don't know, is it possible to link a couple of physical locations, like let's say Angel Square, the Guildhall, and the old County Hall? Is it possible to link those using some sort of technology rather than just Zoom? So you would have members meeting, albeit just acknowledging the fact that there isn't a single room that any council has anywhere in Northants big enough to hold all of us at once. And more so if we have to be spaced out.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how practical that would be, or whether that gives us any more advantages apart from possibly keeping to government legislation with regard to having to meet in a chamber. Presumably you would need some sort of legislation, because you can only have one chair, and so that would be the substantive location for the meeting. The others really are just a group of people doing a Zoom meeting, aren't they? And whether that takes us any further, but I certainly can look at that and ask officers to use some of the chambers that we have with regard to multiple locations at the same meeting.
So, any other questions? So our recommendation here is the Shadow Executive deliberate and agree that the current working location arrangements are maintained where feasible, safe and legal for day one, as per the attached report under the section's recommendation and approach. I also note in the Andrew Flockhart recommendations, he talked about being very clear with staff as to what safe and legal means on day one. So should we be trying to marry those two things up, that we're picking up what Andrew Flockhart saying, that we need to be crystal clear with staff as to what safe and legal means for them individually in their individual departments, and also what it means in terms of the day one accommodation, that we are again marrying those things up?
Chair, sorry, it's Anna here. I can't lift my hand up easily, or for you to be able to see.
just
okay. Sorry, thank
on.
you. It's just to make a point, and it's quite an important one, because we had a bit of difficulty with the comms on this when it went out and the blueprints went out. So you made the point just then that most staff will stay where they are on day one, which gives them some certainty, which is really good. We've been clear in terms of the blueprint, that is unless it has been agreed with the staff that will make some change, in which case we will properly consult with them. And the reason that I raised that, as you know, is because all the adult staff will be being relocated out of these buildings and into community hubs with the agreement of the unions and with consultation with staff, which is already underway. So we need to be very clear on the different messages, that if actually that decision has been made, then they'll be consulted, but otherwise, they will stay where they are. And it's a bit of a nuance, but it's important in terms of our messaging and comms.
Yeah, can I just clarify that? But presumably those moves will be not on vesting day, they will happen before.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, and we're aligned with the day one accommodation group and place services in terms of finding those locations and how many staff go to which location.
So their day one accommodation will be as you're saying, where they are, albeit where they might be in 1st of April might be different to where they are on the 1st of September.
So clear on that point, and for Anna as well, is that this is about where the managers, the supervisors, the senior leaders and directors need to be working with their staff. It's business as usual, to be honest, until vesting day. They will be moved to where they are with regard to the changes in working practices. And of course, that is done with the union's consent and with the staff's consent and with their full knowledge. So I expect that to be done professionally, and I've got no concerns about that. But come day one, vesting day, they will be working from where they are working from.
Okay. Anything else for Richard or any of the officers? So I'll move the recommendations as laid out, that we agree the current working and location arrangements are maintained where feasible, safe and legal for day one, as shown in the report. Are we all agreed? Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. So, logos, communication and engagement.
And I can tell this is the bit you've been looking forward to, Chairman.
I can't wait.
It's by way of an update. Consultation has gone out on draft logos. You will be aware, many of you, that we started off on an approach where we established a few principles about having a clearly displayed name for the council in a logo, a simple modern, flexible design that would lend itself to all applications, from agendas to letterheads to ID badges. And so on, accessible from the point of view of visual impairment, and something that represented a new 21st century sort of organisation. With that brief, we set out and used two in-house designers who are existing employees of Northamptonshire-based councils, and knocked some ideas around and narrowed those down. So we've come to three alternatives, and you'll see, I think, included in your papers is also three rejected designs. The first, a series of 4 rings linking together. I'm going to be really careful to make no comment, judgment, or anything on these, but you'll see the three that are there. Quite a bold one for the first one, contemporary design for the second, and so on. And so forth. Of the rejected designs, you'll see 3 on the next page. One, it was felt wouldn't print out terribly clearly. It was a sort of series of dots showing the west half of the county. The next one was slightly more heraldic in a shield. And whilst that was very much liked, I think we are aware there's a strong interest in pursuing a heraldic emblem for the new council in due course, using the College of Arms, so it felt that might clash. The third one was very liked as well, but we were very careful to avoid any particular icon that related to one part of the patch. And the example you've got there is the Northampton Lighthouse, as it's known, the old express lifts testing tower. And we felt that while there are a number of iconic places across the West, they all represented more their own locality than they did necessarily the West as a whole. Delighted to be able to tell you that as we stand at the moment, 1,272 people have taken the trouble of logging on to the response. I'm just going to tell you that A is ahead at the moment, but actually let's be absolutely honest. What we're about here is we're getting some feedback. These might be the best answers. They might not tweak. They may need tweaking. The people in Northamptonshire may tell us to go back to the drawing board. So there's a number of alternative outcomes that could come from this. So far, it's looking good. People seem to like the fact that logo A contains some bright colours and so on. They're not sure whether logo C is strong enough and memorable enough. This is the sort of feedback that we're getting. The public survey goes on for a little longer, so there is still the opportunity for people to have their views. We have also taken these initial designs out to staff, trade unions, to councillors, to other partners and so on to try and get their view. So the recommendations on this is to note, first of all, that 3 proposed designs, which you'll see in Appendix A, have gone out for that public survey. Note that they've gone to a wide range of sort of stakeholders and so on, and also note that the feedback will be used for any additional work that needs to be done. We have a target date of seeking to get this back to the exec for a final version in November. Let's see how we get on with that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Glad to answer questions.
Any questions? Lizzie?
Yeah. Quickly, I didn't hear what you said. Was it the first that was the preference so far on the survey?
Yeah, and I wondered if I should have said that. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that altogether, but at the moment, yes. Yes, yeah. Lizzie.
Okay.
We're going to start a movement now for logos 2 and 3. Just watch.
Yeah. I can see.
That's actually my preference as well.
I don't want to get into the discussion as to whether we think this is good or bad. I think.
Hold on. The next bit I wanted to ask is, you didn't want to use a crest, as it may be confused if the unitary council goes on to produce the heraldic crest once it's established. So how long do you see, is the heraldic crest in addition to this design if we do it later?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't quite understand that. I'm obviously being thick here. Just
explain. No. That's
is this one
fine.
for you, Jonathan, or is this for Phil with the civic one?
Partly for Phil. I know that the Civic Task and Finish group also have a strong interest in feeling that there should be a heraldic emblem for the new council. The system, as I understand, I knew nothing of this system before, Lizzie, but the College of Arms plays an important part and tends to take quite a significant amount of time to think carefully about what might be the best representative heraldic logo. Obviously, they're very popular, and I know through some of the informal conversations I've had with others, they're very attached to those. One suggestion was bring together the existing sort of logos or heraldic things. In Northampton, we have an ornate heraldic emblem, but we also use a sort of, if you like, a stylized version of that for our letterheads, which is simplified and modern. A number of people said to me, can't we bring the four of those together? The problem with that is, although I like the idea, just too big and too complicated, wouldn't print or fit on ID badges. But no, the aim would be then to move on to heraldic version, including the liaison with the colleges.
Yeah,
you
okay.
got it. Yeah.
Got you. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, I've now got a bit confused. So are we saying that we'll choose a logo, and then when the heraldic shield is decided upon, that will replace what we've chosen? Or will it be combined?
No, this
Join the meeting.
Oh, this will absolutely be it, Richard. That is to say that if we choose something from this, following people's input and perhaps some modifications, that will be the logo. We will prioritise the order to which it's rolled out. So quite clearly there, it may be considered, we haven't done this work yet, it may be considered that it's vital that on day one, staff who have ID badges need to identify themselves correctly. There may be legal reasons behind that. We may feel that bins in the park or even waste lorries are a lesser priority, so there'll be a rollout process, but our aim is to get something that will stick and that will have some longevity. The civic, if you like, the civic one may come more for sort of civic occasions, and there seems to be a strong sense of pride that we ought to have that sort of civic logo in due course, in addition to our what you might call our business logo, shall we say.
Yeah, can I just say, is that been done anywhere else? Because I suppose logically it tells you there's going to be some confusion as to what is our banner, what is our logo. Has it been done elsewhere where they have a commercial, one of a better word, logo, and then a heraldic shield as well? Is there any other councils that have that, and how do they?
I believe so. Certainly at Northampton we have two versions of a similar thing, I suppose, is what we have. So those are two. I believe there are others. Certainly for the moment, the most pressing thing is and what we're concerned about here is the, let's call it the commercial one. The jury's still slightly out on how we then develop the heraldic one, but as Ian rightly says, Councillor Larratt, Phil and his civic task and finish group have also got thoughts about commencing that too. So it's probably a separate discussion to be had there.
All right, yeah, I accept that. Thank you, Chair.
I think we'll end up with a logo that'll be used for everyday use, and then the sort of formal heraldic one for high days and holidays. That kind of
perhaps a badge for the chairman, that kind of thing.
I couldn't put it any better myself, Chair. It is something we've yet to discuss in full, but we will be doing so in due course.
Yeah, and I suspect as well our latitude will be a lot restrained as to what we're actually allowed to do by the College of Arms, as opposed to what we're doing. And I know it's all tied up in symbolism. I don't know what the symbols all mean, but I know it's tied up in symbolism.
That's right.
So the recommendations have been moved by Jonathan. Are we all agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed. Great. We shall crack on. So West Northamptonshire Unitary Council draft blueprint has been circulated in draft format. We are having a deep dive to look at the detail behind that. And sorry, one of the things I should have said at the beginning of the meeting and failed to was I asked Cabinet colleagues to stay on after the call just so we can get ourselves sorted out for that deep dive on Thursday. If there's other areas that we want to look at, we just want to go through that. It shouldn't take too long after the meeting is dispensed with formal business. So who's introducing the is Anna called still? Anna, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. To
whiz us through this.
I'll just obviously you can see the information for yourself, and members will have seen some of this content before, but I'll just draw out just the key points really for you. So obviously we're pleased to present this paper, and members have been asked to make sure that they note the progress that we've made, because if you remember when COVID first struck we believed that a lot of services would have to stay as they were and run by one authority, wouldn't be able to split them within NCC. So huge progress made then in being able to separate them. Also make sure that members have spotted and note the opportunities and the aspirations that we've set out, because in this blueprint, we've tried to give a very high level view about how the services will fit together and be managed, as opposed to also setting out some of the clear aspirations and vision and opportunities that arise out of bringing things together. And what we're looking for tonight, obviously, is an endorsement on those next steps with the detailed blueprint discussions, because below this set of information is some 200 slides, 100-ish for each of the two new authorities, that go through a bit more functional detail of how services will operate on day one, based on the work we've done. So obviously it's important to note in terms of these blueprints that they are not intended to be a structure. They represent the views of just how those services will be aligned to the member portfolios and will fit together. And on page 106 of your pack, you'll see the high level West blueprint, which just shows you how those services will fit together. And you'll notice at the top, in terms of the way that that is structured, we've also called out where we know the community hubs will be for adults in terms of the West Authority, which we just talked about in terms of moving people out to communities. There's a very detailed set of work, as I said, behind this in terms of what will happen in transformation, what we're hoping to transform this side of day one, and also some assurances about the key things we'll put in place to make sure that services continue and there's no disruption. It's also very important to note on page 107 of the pack, you'll see that there is a detailed piece of work that shows you how the two sets of services are split between West and North. And on page 107, it's the West diagram. And it's just important to note in terms of this colour coding that sets out which services will be disaggregated from NCC, which will be hosted by an authority and therefore provided to another, which will be a lead authority model, so provided by the West or the North to the other, and which are externally provided. And it's just important from that point of view that while this is a very busy slide, that members note that the functions, for example, in dark blue, will be where the West is providing a service to the North, and the white boxes with the dark blue edges, and then the same with the white boxes with the turquoise edges. We'll be seeing the North providing a hosted service. So I just think whilst it's quite a lot of detail, it's important that you notice which services are directly in our control and which we'll have to make sure we agree an SLA and arrangement in terms of what's provided to us in the West from the North. The unions have seen these blueprints, and I have to say the feedback on those was very good, very positive. They were pleased at last to get some sense of the plan. And also pleased, I think, to understand that there wasn't some big secret thing that we were going to announce and share on the last day of how it had all been pre-designed. So we're quite clear with them this is the first stage. There is detail below this, and what we're really looking for is endorsement tonight then to move to the next stage of implementation with the services and staff about exactly which staff will go where, which means working through the HR process to assign staff to the North or the West where we're splitting them, or also where staff are transferring just to one of the two services. I'd also just draw members' attention to the fact that we have outlined a kind of broad picture of the opportunities, particularly on slide 111, which talks about the first opportunities that come together by taking away the two tiers of government and creating a real place and people view going forward for West Northants. And we've tried to set out in the pages that follow some of the opportunities that creates for people of the county, whether they're young or old, and what we might do, how it actually provides an opportunity for us to really place shape going forward, and bringing together things like health and well-being alongside education and jobs and economy and infrastructure. So hopefully members can see that it starts to paint that positive picture. And hopefully in the coming months, we'll be engaging on a corporate plan for the Shadow Authority that then can set out some of those ambitions members have for what will happen in terms of those things in the months to come and post go live. And finally, also, we've set out on slides 120 to 122 on the papers, some of the IT capabilities that were being rolled out at the moment, some quite exciting changes. But I think key for that will be this is the sort of IT that will not only enable staff to work in those more flexible ways and collaborative ways we've talked about, but also to make sure customers don't get a disruption in service. So going back to the way the blueprints are designed and the day one accommodation is designed, for example, the contact centre might sit in hubs in all of our different councils on day one, but for the customer, there won't be that experience. It'll be seamless in terms of the way calls are actually moved by technology to the right place and then answered as West Northants Council on day one. So very critical things in terms of that IT capability. If members agree this blueprint, but obviously we're going to go on to the detail in separate sessions, then the next steps would obviously be to move to the implementation stage, clearly to work through the MTFP budget setting process in terms of any investments and implications that come out of this design, and also any diseconomies of scale that come out of splitting NCC services, where at the moment the proposal is we'll have to recruit more staff to be able to manage that disaggregation. So it's key, obviously, we look at that and the impacts of COVID too on the way we work. So overall, I think it's a good first step. It's been welcomed generally, as I said, by unions and staff. And we hopefully will get your support to move to the next stage of this today and begin that implementation and the detailed work on what will actually happen on day one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions? Phil? Sorry, Phil.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks, Chair. Just one question, and probably I should leave it till later, but looking at the blueprint on page 107, and can I say it's very hard for people sitting in Angel Square to talk about colour-coded documents when I'm afraid all I've got is a black and white document. So can I ask that when we're going to be sent prints of such as this, they're sent in colour? But my question is, Chair, why on West Draft Blueprint have we got Chester Farm? I don't know in what context it's there because I can't translate it, but why is Chester Farm on the West Draft Blueprint? That's my question.
Because Councillor Larratt, what this does is going back to things that are provided by one to the other. Chester Farm as an actual asset is located in the north, but it provides an archaeological site and visitors site for the whole county and for residents. So the indications on those colours are the service will be run and the budget and the staff will be managed by the north, but it will actually be a service that's provided to residents of the west as well as the north. So it's shown as a hosted service from that perspective.
Yeah. So all of any archaeological digs that may take place in the west, any of those finds will then be stored at Chester Farm. But then likewise, Phil, physical paper records, which are currently stored in the record office in Northampton, will probably continue to be stored in the record office for Northampton, even for Wellingborough, Kettering and Corby and East Northampton. So I think the blueprints are trying to show a complete set of services that have been sorted out, and what we're doing in a schematic way as best we can. And I do take your point about colour. If ever anything needed to be in colour, that was definitely that slide. It's very much showing that both west and north have a full set of services, albeit there will be times when the west is dependent on the north to deliver back, and there will be times when we are delivering to the north. But between us, we've got a full set of arms and legs.
Thanks, Chair.
Is that your understanding as well, Anna?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, and what we're going to do to the next stage for better, easier digestion is move these sort of functions up into a service level view, which will be things we all recognise more easily, in terms of heritage, tourism, etc. But we wanted to make sure we'd done the detail so everybody kind of knew which functions would sit where and how then the staff would be split for this purpose.
Okay. So any other questions on this? Richard?
Yeah, I thought when I was going through this, I thought the blueprint was lining up all the services with regard to the affordability of those services. But this is just a sort of functional map of delivery, isn't it? Really, it's just presumably the budget envelope won't have an impact on this structure. It just means that because it seems very logical, very straightforward. I haven't got a major problem with it. And presumably finances don't change that structure. It just means that we might have a little less money to spend in various departments. Is that?
Irrespective of the budget, everything on these pages has to be delivered.
Has to be delivered, yeah.
So it's whether or not we can afford to put 50p in one of them and £5 in the other, and we might want to put £5 in both. Those are decisions that need to be taken later.
Right. But there are no nuances with regard to.
There are, sorry. Sorry, Councillor.
Right, there are no nuances.
Anna wants to come in and then Lizzie. So sorry, Richard. Can we bring Anna in and then Lizzie?
Apologies, I didn't mean to talk over you. There is one nuance to this, which is there are two particular services where there is potentially significant diseconomies of scale of splitting them, where the service heads have given us a view about what it would take to run a minimum viable product service on day one. And those two services are public health and education. There are some other ones that are smaller, but those are the two main ones. If we go through the budget cycle process and we find that actually those extra staff to split them is unaffordable, then it may be that we end up coming back round the loop to say, if we can't split them and that's not a priority for members, then do we move for those services back to a hosted one until we've been through the transformation and the saving cycles and all those things that would then fund that decision. But those are probably the only two real ones. There's a couple of others, but those are the big ones. So there is a bit of a nuance about affordability around a couple of areas.
That was my question. So there could be an impact on this structure, depending on later down the road, we might have to revisit, but it'll just be tinkering rather than whole-scale change, you're saying?
That's right, correct, yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lizzie. Sorry.
Okay, so day one, Safe and Legal Plus. At the moment, am I right, Anna, in saying that some services we provide NCC are not statutory? They are above and beyond statutory. When we move to next year, will we just be providing statutory services, or will there be some that are nice to have as well?
So the current assumption, Councillor Bowen, is that we will continue to deliver the services we do now, whether or not they've got enhancements, or as you say, they're delivering over and above the statutory duties. Of course, the big thing that will inform that will be the MTFP cycle and going through the task and finish groups. If we find we've got a significant gap and we're not getting the national support for it, then clearly we may have to revisit that very question we had before, which is where can you reduce a service or reduce investment because actually you're paying for something more than your statutory duty.
Yeah, which is why we got ourselves into the pickle. One of the reasons, anyway. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, it's Paul here. Just to add to what Anna said there, that would be a process whether we were going through unitary or not. In the current climate, we'd have to go through those decision-making processes over the coming months. And what the unitary bit does is give us a platform and an opportunity to think differently about things. So I'm looking at it as a positive rather than a negative, although it will be a challenge.
Yeah, and we have tried, haven't we, with like home to school transport to try and bring it into line, but it's been challenging, shall we say, to say the least. But yeah, okay, got it. Yep, thank you.
Yeah. There are probably also many district services which are in the non-statute category as well. That again, we wouldn't want to ditch them all.
No.
If it's possible to hold on to them. So we remember we will be aggregating those services in as well. So your question about will we only be doing our statutory responsibilities, we need to look at both sides of it as well. So on the blueprint, any other questions, queries or comments? So before we move off, I know we have a deep dive that we'll be we'll be doing that later in the week. So before we move off that, we had a lot of recommendations. Can I just place on record my thanks, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of the executive, to all of the members, to Anna and the whole team, sorry, all of the officers, not the members, who've actually put a hell of a lot of work into getting this to this point. I know a lot of midnight oil was burned. I know a lot of last minute work was done in order to bring it up, to get it there. And there's a very fine line between wanting to get something early that members can appreciate and also getting something which is comprehensive. So thank you to everybody who's got us to this point. It sort of feels like we're beginning to get a shape of something to come. I'm sure I am most grateful to everybody that's done it, and I know we're probably not even halfway through all the work that needs to be done, but nonetheless, I don't want anybody to think that their efforts thus far have not been recognised, and I thank you all. So I will now move the recommendations as set out in 2.1, to note the progress that's been made, to note the ask and approve the draft blueprint, including how services are likely to be configured with the new council, to note the aspirations and opportunities set out in the papers as a result of bringing the services together. I endorse the wider engagement programme as set out in section 4, agree to receive feedback on the blueprint from employees, members, trade unions and others, and recommend to the full West Northamptonshire Shadow at Sea that they adopt the draft blueprint. Executive colleagues, are we agreed on that?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Great. Thank you. So I now move to exempt items, of which there are none, urgent items, of which again none have been identified. So at 20 minutes past 7, I will close the formal business of the meeting. Thank you all. And can I just ask that members stay on, that we can quickly go through things. Do people want to